Okay, perfect. All right, so hi everyone. My name is Ayah and I'm a second year medical student, and today we're going to be discussing thyroid hormones. This also is really cute. It's really simple, and Dr. Simon actually explained it really well if you want to go over his slides. But here I just summarized some parts and I clarified some parts. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me at my number or my email, which are attached below. All right, so let's start. Okay, so here are the objectives. And honestly, me personally, I hate reading objectives. So here I put the high yield points that I want you to focus on. I want you to understand the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, understand how do we make T3 and T4, understand how T3 and T4 circulate the body, how is T4 converted peripherally, and to what are the functions of thyroid relating to CVP, CNS, reproductive, respiratory, and skeletal systems, what are the symptoms of hypo and hyperthyroidism, and what did we mention? What diseases did we mention, and what are their causes? Okay, so let's start with the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. Okay, so what I want you guys to understand is that all of these organs are releasing hormones, and these hormones trigger like a reaction in the other organ. Okay, so the hypothalamus releases TRH, which is thyrotropin releasing hormone, and thyrotropin releasing hormone goes to the TSH, to the pituitary gland, and it stimulates the release of TSH. Okay, so TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so from the name, TSH goes to the thyroid and it binds to receptors on the thyroid cells, and it tells them to release thyroid hormones, which are T4 and T3. Okay, so what I want you guys to know is that T3 is the more important one here because it goes back to the hypothalamus and to the TSH, and it negatively feedbacks. So it tells them stop making these hormones enough, basically. Okay, so here I put it all into text. I said the hypothalamus releases TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone, and I said that's just its name because in my time, I'd be like, what does thyrotropin even mean? Guys, it's just its name. Memorize it like that, okay? You can read the rest on your own. Moving on, we're going to talk about the histology of the thyroid gland. Okay, so what I want you guys to know is that the thyroid gland, its job, like its sole purpose, is just releasing thyroid hormones. Okay, so first off, this is the thyroid gland altogether. And then you zoom in and you find the smallest functional unit, which is called the thyroid follicle. Okay? So the thyroid follicle is made out of a bunch of cells that secrete they basically secrete like a protein inside of the lumen. And this is called colloid. So colloid is just like a big gel-like material that that the cells secreted, and it's inside of the lumen, and that's why it looks kind of fat like that. Okay, so I want you to know that the colloid is actually made out of thyroglobulin, which is made of tyrosine molecules. So colloid is made of thyroglobulin, which is made of tyrosine. Okay. So the bigger the gland and the more colloid it has indicates how active it is. That's pretty much self-explanatory. So because there's so much colloid, it means it's producing more thyroglobulin. And because it has more thyroglobulin, which we will use to make T3 and T4, that means it's more active. So I want you to observe the parafollicular cells, aka C cells, which produce calcitonin. It's irrelevant what calcitonin is. I'm not going to discuss it in this class, and I'm pretty sure you don't discuss it in endo-repro at all. So, or maybe just a little bit. So parafollicular cells, honestly, you won't be able to see them in this picture that clearly. So I'd rather you go and see them in lab. Tamam? All right. So now we're going to the interesting part, which is how T3 and T4 are made. Okay, and so this is the picture that Dr. Simon puts in his lecture. And I found it really confusing because there's like a bunch of different structures. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw on it and I'm gonna do like a bunch of other drawings on their own. Okay, so there's two facts that I want you to know. First off, the TSH stimulates receptors in the thyroid gland. I already said this. The TSH comes from the pituitary gland, and it comes and it stimulates the receptors on the thyroid gland to make thyroid hormone. So yeah, the second one is that the thyroid adds iodine to tyrosine to make T3 and T4. So it's important to remember one, iodine, and two, tyrosine. So yeah, these are the components of thyroid hormone. Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about how T3 and T4 are made. So T3, okay, so first off, we said that T3 and T4 are made out of two things. They're made out of tyrosine and iodine. And I want to tell you guys that thyroglobulin, we said it's made out of 134 tyrosine molecules. So thyroglobulin is the one that is going to provide the tyrosine to us. All right, so thyroglobulin is a protein. So where are proteins usually made? They're usually made in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So it's made there and then it's sent to the Golgi apparatus, which, modifies the proteins, adds stuff, deletes stuff, and then, well, it doesn't delete stuff, it just takes off stuff, I guess. And it packages the thyroglobulin and it sends it outside of the cell. Okay, so here we have a concept that I want to clarify. We have two sides of the cell, one called apical and the other one called basal, okay? Okay, so the apical surface is the surface in which like the lumen is, tamam? So these are a bunch of cells. This is the lumen, and they all secrete the thyroglobulin, which is where the colloid is, tamam? The basal side is where the blood cells are, okay? Perfect, now we're moving on. So we said the thyroglobulin is made in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It's packaged in the Golgi apparatus, and then it's sent to the lumen, to the apical side, and it goes to the lumen. Okay. Okay. Now we have the thyroglobulin in the lumen. Now what do we need? We need the iodine itself. So iodine comes in the form of iodide, which is going around in the blood cells. So the iodide reaches the cell, the thyroid cell, and it goes into the cell using a transporter called NIS. NIS. So it's a protein transporter. It takes in the iodide. And the thing about it, N is for sodium, so Na. I is for iodide. And then S is for symporter. So what does it do? It takes in 2 sodium ions and 1 iodide ion, and it brings them all together into the cell. And the thing that's important here, in the sodium, in its concentration outside of the cell is more than inside, right? So sodium is going down its concentration gradient and it takes iodide with it. And to maintain this concentration gradient, like any other cell, the thyroid cell has the sodium potassium transporter. Okay? اللي هو sodium potassium ATPase. All right? Okay. So the first step we said is that iodide goes through the NIS. So now it goes through the cell to the other side, to the apical side, and it exits the cell through a transporter called pendrin. Now, pendrin is an iodide chloride exchanger. So one iodide goes out and one chloride goes in. Okay? Wait, no, it's the opposite. Okay, perfect. Type. All right. Now, an idea here is really important. This idea here is really important. It's that the more iodide there is in the body, the less NIS will be made. On the other hand, the more TSH, the more NIS being made. So we can just imagine TSH goes to the cell and it tells it there's like we want more iodide in the cells, and so it tells it basically to make more NIS so that more iodide can enter the cell. So this makes sense. This part, the more iodide there is in the body, the less NIS will be made. Also makes sense because if you have too much iodide in the body, sometimes the body's like, okay, maybe that's too much. Maybe like we have to find a way to, not take it in so that nothing happens to the body. And that's why it tells basically when there's more iodide, it tells the cells that they should decrease the amount of NIS transporter that they make. Okay, so how is T3 and T4 made? We're still continuing that. Here we have step 3, which is that the iodide moves across the cell to the apical surface and it's transported into lumen using an iodide chloride exchanger named pendrin. Okay, so now we have the iodide inside and we have the thyroid. Okay, so we know the cell, we know the apical surface. So now we have the thyroglobulin and we have the iodide. But before we use the iodide, it has to be changed into iodine. And it does that with an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase. TPO, thyroid peroxidase. Okay, so I would recommend you guys actually memorize this name because it comes up a lot. Thyroid peroxidase is like the most important agent we have today. Okay, and the reaction is 2 iodine plus H2O2, which is hydrogen peroxide, will give us I2. Tamam? So I also want you to remember that this reaction uses hydrogen peroxide. So let's repeat this one more time. 2 iodines and hydrogen peroxide will give us iodine. 2 iodides plus hydrogen peroxide will give us iodine, and it's catalyzed by TPO or thyroid peroxidase. Okay, now we're going to move on to step 5, which is that the iodine is added to the tyrosine. We finally reached that part where we're going to add the iodine to the tyrosine. And this process is called iodination or organification. So here we have the tyrosine plus 1 iodine, which will give us monoiodotyrosine, MIT. So if we add another iodine to monoiodotyrosine, it'll give us diiodotyrosine. Okay, so MIT, DIT, where's T3 and T4? So basically T3 and T4 is the coupling of these, like you add either MIT plus DIT, or you add DIT plus DIT. So MIT plus DIT will give us T3. And then DIT plus DIT, that's 4 iodines, and it'll give us T4. Okay. So here I added an extremely important point. It's that all these reactions are catalyzed by TPO, which is thyroid peroxidase. I want you guys to remember this name. Okay. And they all use H2O2. So that's a lot of H2O2 getting used up. So how do we remake the H2O2? How do we bring it back so that we can keep using it? So H2O2 is actually regenerated with 2 enzymes called DuoX1 and DuoX2, which are both a part of a class known as dual oxidases. So I want you to remember the name. If not Duo1 and Duo2, I want you to remember dual oxidases. Tamam? Okay. All right. So moving on. Okay, so we said most of the tyrosine molecules don't get iodinated. A number of them do get iodinated, but don't actually form T3 and T4. So basically, if they don't form T3 and T4, then they stay as MIT and DIT. Okay, so the thyroglobulin, which contains the T3 and T4, gets endocytosed, then the vesicle joins with the lysosome. Okay, so this part is really simple. basically the thyroglobulin, all of this coupling was happening inside of the thyroglobulin. So the tyrosine molecules are still attached to the thyroglobulin. So the thyroglobulin goes up to the cell membrane, and it basically, the cell membrane like engulfs it, it endocytoses it, and it brings it in. Okay, now a lysosome attaches to the thyroglobulin, and it breaks down the thyroglobulin. So now thyroglobulin is broken down, and it releases the MIT, DIT, T3, T4, it releases everything. So هنا T3 and T4 are set to go out of the cell, they want to leave. And MIT and DIT, they're not ready yet, so they go back. They go back and they get uniodinated. So basically, we take the iodine out of them. This is done using an enzyme called iodotyrosine deiodinase. The names of the proteins are all important, to be honest, but the most important one is TPO. So basically, MIT and DIT get deiodinated, so we can like re-add them to a thyroglobulin, and the process starts again. Okay. On the other hand, T3 and T4 leave the cell through a carrier called MCT8 or monocarboxylate 8. Carb 8. Type. I put all the names here, so you don't have to worry. I'm just going to read this real quick. And the lysosome degrades the thyroglobulin, releasing the T3, T4, and the spare MIT and DIT. The MIT, DIT are deiodinated, so the iodine is removed using an enzyme called iodotyrosine deiodinase. And the T3 and T4 cross the basal membrane, so into the blood. قلنا إنه we have the basal and the apical, وهنا the bloodstream. So they leave the cell and enter the blood through a membrane protein called monocarboxylate transporter, or MCT8. Guys, we did really well. We're done with how T3 and T4 are made, and that's like literally the second major objective. So moving on. So this is basically just a little summary of the points that I want you to focus on. And the thyroid adds iodine to tyrosine to make T3 and T4. T4 is produced in more amounts than T3. So T4 more than T3. And T3 is the more active form. So guys, you remember that I said that T3 goes back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary and tells them to stop making hormones. That's why, because T3 is the more active form. It just does more work. So because T4 is made more and T3 is the more active form, it makes sense that T4 is converted to T3 peripherally, but not the other way around. Okay? So what next? So the T3 and T4 are now in the bloodstream. So what now? All right. So T3 and T4 are mostly bound to thyroxine binding globulin, and they circulate the blood. So thyroxine binding globulin, I'm not gonna lie to you, this is an important name. You should probably like commemorate that to your memory. It's mostly bound to thyroxine, so the majority, more than 70%, is bound to 70% is okay. More than 70% is bound to the TBG. Okay, so then we have a little amount of them in the free. So free thyroid hormones are really super low. You don't have to memorize the numbers, but it's 0.3 for T3 and 0.02 for T4. Okay, so thyroxine binding globulin is super important because it acts like a buffer. So important because it acts like a buffer. You guys know what a buffer is. A buffer means that if the levels of T3 and T4 in the blood increase, then it binds more T3 and T4. If the levels of the T3 and T4 in the blood decrease, then it releases some of the T3 and T4 so they can fill in the gap. Okay. TBG also helps T3 and T4 from getting degraded or lost in urine. So basically, it increases their half-life. No, if they were left free in the body, then they would probably get degraded really quickly. They would be lost in literally every place. So it makes sense that they get stored in the TBG. Okay. So here it says the half-life of T4 is 5 to 7 days, while T3 is only 1 day. This is important because a lot of questions come where they're saying like, how long is the half-life of this? How long is the half-life of that? So you guys should probably at least like remember if it's a week or a day or like a few hours. Okay. So the T3 and T4 bind to transthyretin in the CNS. So here the keyword is the CNS. Okay, so the CNS is the central nervous system, and the CNS has something called cerebrospinal fluid, which is like the fluid of the brain. Okay, so it's important to remember that transthyretin is the one that binds them in the cerebrospinal fluid in the CNS. Okay, so some T3 and T4 are bound to albumin. This is not really important, just it's like literally like 15% which are bound to albumin. But the most important one is TBG. Okay, moving on. Okay, so now the thyroid hormones are traveling around the body. What next? So now sometimes we need the hormone to actually do its job. So we said that T3 is the active form, but most of what's in the blood is T4. So I already mentioned that T4 gets converted to T3 peripherally. All right, so before it does that, T4 first enters the cell using MCT8. So do you guys remember when we mentioned MCT8 earlier? Okay, I'll give you a second to answer. All right, perfect. It's when we were taking the T3 and T4 out of the thyroid gland and into the bloodstream. So for this to work, T4 is converted to T3 inside of the cell, not outside of the cell, inside. So T4 is taken inside of the cell first, and then it's converted to T3. This process is done by deiodinase proteins, and we have 3 types: D1, D2, D3. So honestly, I'll tell you, it's really important to remember where exactly they're found. So D1 is found in the thyroid, the liver, and the kidney. D2 is found in the brain, specifically the pituitary to help with TSH regulation. Like we said, and T3 goes back to the, this is just like in the T4, it goes to the basically to the pituitary and it gets converted to T3, and then it tells the brain to stop making proteins, to stop making hormones. D3 is a special type of deiodinase which turns T4 into an inactive T3 type. So sometimes you have too much, basically. You have too much T4, you have too much T3, and your body's like, okay, what do I do with it now? And we know that T3 is the active form of the thyroid. So then the body decides to change the T4 into an inactive T3. So basically the inactive T3 does nothing. It has no function. Clear? All right. So just revising, D1 and D2 are going to convert T4 into T3 using proteins, deiodinase proteins. Okay, so now thyroid hormones in the cell, so now T4 was converted into T3 and T3 is free to do its job. It binds to the receptor inside of the cell's nucleus. This is really important. It's inside of the nucleus. It's a nuclear receptor. And it's important because sometimes they ask you which hormone has a receptor inside of the nucleus, which hormone has a receptor outside of the cell. That kind of thing is really important, so you guys should focus on that. This causes the cell to make changes. Basically, it enhances gene expression, or it tells it to stop making some proteins. So by gene expression, you either make proteins or you stop making proteins. So thyroid hormone has all types of effects all over the body. It has direct effects on the body, but it also enhances the function of other hormones and neurotransmitters, helping them work more efficiently. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the effects of the thyroid hormone, and we're starting with all cells. It has an effect on all cells. It increases their basal metabolic rate. Okay? So what do we mean by basal metabolic rate? So I want you to ignore basal and just focus on metabolic rate. So what does metabolic mean? It means like using energy. right? Or doing processes. طيب. So thyroid hormone tells any cell to use more energy. It tells it to make more ATP. It tells it to burn more ATP, to make more ATP. And it tells the sodium, potassium, ATPase, and the circa protein, which we'll talk about later, to work more. It enhances the GI uptake of the nutrients, especially glucose. It enhances the degradation and then remaking of proteins. So basically, this is called this protein turnover. And it increases gluconeogenesis, which is the production of glucose, and glycogenolysis, which is the breaking down of glycogen. It has respiratory effects. It increases the intake of O2 by increasing the respiratory rate. Increasing the respiratory rate, معناها you're just gonna breathe more per minute. It increases the minute ventilation and it helps the body cope with either high carbon dioxide levels or low oxygen levels. By doing this, it just maintains the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood at all times. And it also stimulates the kidney to produce erythropoietin. So erythropoietin is a hormone that produces more red blood cells. So if we have more red blood cells, what would happen? طبعا we'll have more oxygen all over the body. So it's going to have, the red blood cells are going to carry more oxygen, and we're just going to have better like respiration of everything. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about cardiovascular effects, and the cardiovascular effects is like the most relevant here. So it increases the cardiac output, enhances cardiovascular effects through direct and indirect ways. So first off, we're going to talk about the direct ways. And it increases the stroke volume. So do you guys remember what the stroke volume is? If not, I'll remind you. It's just basically the amount of blood that gets pumped per minute, like every minute, I think. And it has a positive inotropic effect. طبعا, I don't know what inotropic means either, but I put the meaning here, and it increases the strength of cardiac contractions. It has a positive conotropic effect, which means it increases the heart rate, and basically it increases the cardiac output because the heart rate is increased and the stroke volume is increased, so the cardiac output has to increase. Increases systolic blood pressure, decreases diastolic blood pressure. Thyroid hormone stimulates the release of catecholamines like epinephrine, norepinephrine, which also increase the cardiac output blood pressure. So we already know that epinephrine and norepinephrine stimulate the heart through like beta receptors, and it tells it to like pump more, pump faster, all that kind of stuff. So basically, when you put catecholamines and you bring thyroid hormone, like they work together to do a better job. All right. So because of the heat this is the indirect way. So here we talked about the direct. These are all direct ways in which the thyroid hormone helps increase the cardiovascular effects. And these are the indirect ways. Because of the heat in peripheral tissue, because we said it increases the basal metabolic rate, so that increases the heat all over the body. It causes dilation of the arteries, and this causes decreased arterial resistance. Okay, isn't that crazy? So also because it increases oxygen intake and usage, that means more carbon dioxide, which increases the heart rate. So because there's more carbon dioxide, the body senses that through its sensors and chemoreceptors, and it tells the heart to work faster and work more because we're trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide. Okay, so we're continuing the cardiovascular effects. So the increased contractility is because of the high alpha myosin heavy chain expression and sodium calcium exchanger inhibition. So let's break this sentence into two parts. First off, the increased contractility is because of the high alpha myosin heavy chain expression. So I hope you guys remember what myosin and actin do. So basically, actin binds to actin, and it induces like a power stroke, and then we have muscle contraction. صح?
طيب, so we have the important thing to understand is that we have two types of myosin. We have alpha myosin and we have beta myosin. So alpha myosin is the one that is like, it has like really fast contraction, while beta myosin has a slow contraction. And that's why increased contractility, so it's a faster contraction when we have the alpha myosin chain, heavy chain. طيب. So for the sodium calcium exchanger, I hope you guys remember that calcium inside of the muscle, the cardiac muscle, it causes basically the contraction of the muscle. طيب. So we need calcium for the contraction. So if so the sodium calcium exchanger, basically it brings one sodium inside of the cell and it takes calcium outside of the cell. So if this is like, it's stopped, it's inhibited, then the calcium accumulates in the cell and you just have a stronger contraction, you have a stronger contraction, and you have a short, and it happens in a shorter amount of time. So it's more effective, basically. طيب. So now we go on to the ryanodine receptors in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So ryanodine receptors are associated with calcium-induced calcium release. So basically what happens in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we have calcium, صح? So then basically calcium from outside of the cell, it comes and it basically like it reaches the ryanodine receptors. And then these ryanodine receptors release like a bunch of calcium. So if we have more ryanodine receptors, it makes sense, and then we have more calcium. Okay, so if we have more calcium, again, it's the same thing, and it increases like it increases the effectivity of the contraction. So it increases the strength of the contraction, and the contraction just happens faster overall. تمام? And then we have increased SERCA activity and decreased phospholambin. So first off, what I want you to know, in the phospholambin, it goes and it inhibits SERCA. So that's basically what phospholambin does. Phospholambin is an inhibitor of SERCA. So if we have phospholambin, then we have less SERCA. So what does SERCA do on the other hand? So SERCA, it enhances the uptake of calcium from the cell into the sarcoplasmic reticulum for storage. So why is this good? It's good because, so basically, because we want to store the calcium for the next, what's it called? For the next contraction, and also because it like stops the calcium from staying inside of the cell for too long. All right. So moving on to the next point.
We have the muscle effects. As we said, thyroid hormone increases gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, and it increases ATP usage and making. So now we're going to move on to growth and maturation. Basically, the most important thing is that thyroid hormone is important in neurological development. طيب? That's the most important part. And if the thyroid hormone decreases in fetal life, then they'll have severe like neurological deficits. Okay, it also promotes normal bone growth. It enhances activity of the cartilage, so it makes cartilage, basically. Make sure that the cartilage is made. And it's important in babies or children because it works together with the growth hormone, also known as GH, and insulin-like growth factor, IGFI, to help children grow normally. Helps with teeth development. In adults, it's important because it helps with bone remodeling, which على فكرة is a constant process. So bone is constantly like breaking itself and like remaking itself to make it like stronger. So yep, it also helps with hair growth, nail growth, and skin turnover. Okay, effects on the CNS. We already said in fetal life and like early neonatal life, it's really important because if you don't have this hormone, you can have irreversible CNS impairment. حتى if you give them after birth, it won't fix anything because خلاص, that's it, they're done. طيب, it's important at birth, it's like at and after birth, it's important for wakefulness, alertness, responsiveness, all that. You can read that later. It ensures normal emotional response. In reproductive organs is really important, and the most important part is that it's important for the normal menstrual cycle. Now, you guys will probably learn more about this in repro, but the menstrual cycle is the one that girls have like every 28 to 35 days, I think. And basically, thyroid hormone is needed for the menstrual cycle to be normal. So it's also needed for the process of making sperms. And low levels, as we said, can cause neurological damage and also pregnancy problems in general. So now we move on to the diseases. We have two types: hypothyroidism, which from the name, you have a decrease in the thyroid hormone, or hyperthyroidism, which is an increase in the thyroid hormone. So hyperthyroidism. Here we have a specific type called Graves' disease. So Graves' disease is the most common form of hyperthyroidism. It's autoimmune, and what happens in this disease, the what's it called, TSH receptors on the TSH receptors on the thyroid gland. Basically, we have like these little antibodies that look like TSH. So imagine TSH looks like this. And then we have like antibodies that come and they look kind of similar. So those look the exact same. So imagine just they almost look exactly the same. So these are the antibodies. It's a fake. And it comes and it binds to the TSH receptor, and it constantly tells the thyroid glands like, make more, make more, make more, make more. And the thyroid gland just keeps making thyroid hormone the whole time. So it's more common in women, and it causes thyroid toxicosis, which means too much thyroid hormone. Thyroid toxicosis symptoms, we have weight loss, because as we said, in Nu, the thyroid hormone increases the basal metabolic rates, which basically means you're constantly burning energy. You're constantly making energy and burning energy. Like you're just constantly using the glucose is what I mean. It also causes excess heat production, because of the increased basal metabolic rate. So that causes sweating and heat intolerance, increased heart rate because we mentioned the cardiovascular effects, and increases the chronotropic and ionotropic effects. It increases nervousness and emotional instability because we said thyroid hormone is important for emotional regulation. Increases muscle weakness and difficulty swallowing it causes difficulty swallowing because of the enlarged thyroid. So the thyroid, it's like literally almost right over the esophagus. Or it's like right over the trachea. So when it grows inside, it basically just compresses on the esophagus, and you can't swallow easily. It causes oligomenorrhea. This is a word that you're going to hear about a lot. Oligomenorrhea just means abnormal periods. So rather than every 35 days, it'll be every 18 days, or every 50 days. It's not normal. Exothalamus is like the key word here. When you read exothalamus, it's almost always hyperthyroidism or Graves' disease. Okay, so here we're just gonna go over them again. Exothalamus, which is the bulging of the eyes. Look at it here. Goiter, like here. Arrhythmia and tachycardia, we said increased heart rate. Nausea and diarrhea, just increased like the body's just working overtime, okay? Oligomenorrhea, muscle weakness, tremor, and sweat. Okay, so now we're going to talk about thyroid toxicosis treatment. And honestly, this part you can just read through it. But basically, when we increase the levels of T4 and T3, we want to check if the TSH is also raised, like if the amount of TSH is also raised. So is it a problem with the pituitary gland, or is it a problem with the thyroid itself? So if TSH is high, then it's a problem with the pituitary gland. And if it's low, like in Graves' disease, then it's a problem with the thyroid itself, or like something's affecting the thyroid only. So treatment options include anti-thyroid meds, like you can read that later. They stop the thyroid from making too many hormones. We have radioactive iodine, which basically is absorbed by the overactive thyroid cells, and it basically destroys the cells, and it can cause hypothyroidism later on. So we have surgery also, which is removing the thyroid, and this also causes hypothyroidism. But hypothyroidism can be like fixed by hormone replacement therapy. Right? So we just basically give them the thyroid hormone artificially. Okay, so now we're gonna go to hypothyroidism. It can either be primary or secondary. In primary, T3 and T4 are low, but TSH is high, and it can be a problem with the iodide intake type. In secondary, the problem is with the TSH itself, so it means it's a problem with the pituitary type. So we'll have sorry, this is wrong actually. The problem is with the thyroid itself, so low levels of TSH. Wait, I messed up. Okay, wait. One more time. In the first one, the problem is the T3 and T4. So it's the problem with the thyroid. The thyroid is not producing enough thyroid hormone, so it's going to be low. And the TSH itself is high. So the TSH is high because it's trying to compensate. It's like trying to tell the thyroid gland to increase the thyroid hormone production, but the thyroid gland, like it has a problem, it's not listening. So in secondary, the problem is with the TSH. So low levels of TSH, so the pituitary probably has a problem. It's not producing enough TSH, and so it causes low T3 and T4. So hypothyroidism in fetal life, also known as congenital hypothyroidism, causes lifelong complications. It causes like neurological deficits. It causes basically coarse facial features and a protruding tongue, and it causes short stature and incomplete skeletal development because we said it's important in the making of bones in fetal life. And I wanted to stress congenital hypothyroidism is usually caused because of lack of iodine. So مثلا the mother doesn't take enough iodine, and so the baby doesn't receive enough iodine. Okay, and this usually happens in like endemic areas, and honestly it doesn't happen a lot because you know how they put iodine in salt these days, so it almost never happens. So now we're going to go to a special type of hypothyroidism disease. It's called Hashimoto's disease, and it's not an iodide problem. It's not, okay? It's autoimmune, just like Graves' disease, but here it's the opposite. The antibodies attack thyroid peroxidase. So can we remember what thyroid peroxidase does? We said thyroid peroxidase is important in the making of T3 and T4. It's involved in a number of reactions, and it's impossible to make T3 and T4 if there's no thyroid peroxidase. This disease destroys the thyroid gland. Okay, now we're reaching the last part, which is myxedema. So myxedema is severe hypothyroidism. So it's the opposite of hyperthyroidism, and this is what it's going to present as. They feel cold. We said in hyperthyroidism they feel hot all the time. They feel cold. Here they have dry skin, sparse hair, because we said the thyroid gland is needed for skin turnover and for hair follicles. So it's just going to be decreased overall. This causes non-pitting edema, which I put in a picture here. Non-pitting basically, okay, so edema means accumulation of fluid. Then it says because of the accumulation of polysaccharides in connective tissue, basically water is always, attracted to polysaccharides. So if there's polysaccharides, then the water will go there. And this causes a non-pitting edema, which causes also swelling in face and legs. So non-pitting edema means, okay, so swelling is caused because of the water, and the non-pitting edema is caused because of the thickened skin. So non-pitting edema basically means when you put your hand on it, or like if you touch it, it doesn't like bounce back. You know what I mean? After you like remove your hand, it doesn't bounce back. It's just like, no. So like if you push it in, it's like, how if you have edema, it like causes like a mark. Here it won't cause a mark. It's just gonna stay the same, like same level. Tamam? Okay. It also causes mental fogging, معناها يعني the person will come and feel like confused, and it causes decreased breathing and heart rate, and it causes weight gain. طيب. It's the opposite of hyperthyroidism, where they'll have increased breathing and heart rate, and they'll have weight loss. طيب. Now we're going to come to something called myxedema crisis. It happens when the body can't handle severe hypothyroidism anymore, leading to serious decompensation and needing immediate treatment. On top of the usual hypothyroidism symptoms, you'll see slow breathing, low sodium levels, low body temperature, confusion, shock, low oxygen levels, high carbon dioxide, seizures, or coma. So honestly, just read this part. Just know myxedema is like fatal. It's a fatal type of hypothyroidism when the body's like, I can't do this anymore. Type. It can be fatal, and it often causes complications like infections, bleeding, or respiratory failure. Type. So this is a summary of hypo and hyperthyroidism. They're completely the opposite of each other, and you guys should probably go through this. Okay, any questions? If you have questions, don't forget to contact me. Type. If no one has questions, then I have some. All right. So what are the functions of these proteins? So we have TPO, duo X1, D1, D2, T3, MCT8, iodotyrosine dehydrogenase, transthyretin. Type. So TPO is needed in several reactions in the making of T3 and T4. So go back and revise that once more because it's actually really important. Duo X1 is needed for the remaking of H2O2 so that we have a constant supply of H2O2 when we're doing like the coupling of T3 and T4. D1, D2, D3 are needed for peripheral conversion of T4. So these two convert it to T3, and this one converts it to an inactive form of T3. So MCT8 is the transporter that transports the thyroid hormones outside of the thyroid in the beginning, and then it also transports it inside into the cells that need it. Iodotyrosine dehydrogenase is the one that changes. Iodotyrosine dehydrogenase is like D1, D2, D3. It's also present in the thyroid hormone in the beginning, and it changes MIT and DIT back into what they were before, so just tyrosine. Then we have transthyretin, which is basically the like TBG, which is thyroxine binding globulin, and it's present in the CNS, as we said. CNS. All right. Okay, so now we're going to go to the questions. A 50-year-old woman complains that in the past few months, she has had little energy, has frequently felt chilled, and has noticed excessive hair loss when she washes her hair. During the physical examination, her blood pressure registers at 105. Her pulse is low. Her physician notes dry skin with puffiness in the face and arms. Preliminary diagnosis of primary hypothyroidism is made. If the diagnosis is correct, which of the following blood values would be expected? I'll give you a minute to think about it. So in hypothyroidism, we have a decrease. Primary hypothyroidism, معناها there's a problem with the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland is not producing enough T3 and T4. So that means we're gonna have less T3, T4, and we're gonna have less free T4. We're gonna have less T3, we're gonna have high TSH because the problem is with the thyroid gland, not the pituitary. So let's go, it's C, it's D. So low, 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 and high. That's the answer. Good job, guys. So which of the following proteins is found only at the basolateral side of the thyroid epithelium? So let's draw the cell again. So هنا the basolateral side or the basal side. وهنا the apical side where is. Okay. Did you think about it? Okay, so the answer is A. It's the NIS symporter. طيب? Okay. Okay. So now peripheral deiodinase can have which effect on T4? Okay. So we said there's three types of deiodinases. We have D1, D2, D3. So D1 and D2 activate it. They turn it into T3, which is its active form. And this one deactivates it, so it changes it into inactive T3. طيب. So these are the answers. And good luck with your exam. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And also, guys, don't forget to scan the QR code. And, like if you have any suggestions or feedback you want to give me, it's always welcome. Thank you for your time. Bye.